The ship died slowly. That was the worst part. Not the explosion, not the breach, the slow, grinding way the asterisk Korathi carrier Velessa folded into herself like wet paper left in rain. Vela-3 watched it from the bridge of her own vessel, her 4 eyes fixed on the display, and did not look away. She owed it that much. Someone had to watch. 43 crew aboard the asterisk Velessa. Now none. She turned back to her station and began logging hull integrity reports for her own ship. Bay 7, minor breach sealed. Propulsion array 2, operating at 60%. Crew casualties, she stopped. Started again. Wrote the numbers down. The numbers were easier than names. Around her, the bridge of the asterisk Corey's breath hummed with the low, controlled noise of people managing disaster. No one shouted. Korathi officers did not shout. They spoke in the clipped, precise tones of a people who had learned, across 2,000 years of war, that panic was a luxury they could not afford. What they had instead was the fold, the ancient withdrawal protocol, the calculated retreat, the living doctrine that said, survive today, fight tomorrow, and if tomorrow is also bad, survive that too. The fold was not cowardice. Vela-3 knew this. She had been taught it before she could walk. Survival is the highest valor. A dead soldier carries no spears. Every elder, every military text, every prayer carved into the stone walls of the academy on Chorus Prime said the same thing in different words. She believed it. She had always believed it. She watched another Korathi frigate take a direct hit from a Kreth Dominion railgun and tried to keep believing it. The Kreth Dominion had come from the dark 3 cycles ago. No declaration, no negotiation, no warning that would have mattered. They arrived with a fleet the size of a migration and the specific patience of something that had done this before and knew exactly how it ended. The Korathi border systems had lasted 11 days. The secondary defense line had lasted 4. Now the remnant fleet, 41 ships, down from 112, held a ragged formation in the shadow of the gas giant Vela-3, privately called the Old Man, because of the way its storm bands wrapped around it like a face caught mid-worry. The Old Man was worried now. She could not blame him. Distress beacon confirmed sent, said the officer to her left. His name was Ren. He was 22 years old and had been on his first deep space deployment when this started. Full spectrum broadcast. Coalition channels, human channels, Vex relay, everything. Acknowledged, said Admiral Drescon from his seat at the center of the bridge. He did not look up from his terminal. Vela-3 knew what was on that terminal. She had seen the file header when she passed his station an hour ago. Conditional Surrender Protocol 7 draft. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't desperate. He was doing what a good commander did, preparing for every outcome, including the bad ones, so that when the bad one arrived there would be no scrambling, no delay, no unnecessary deaths in the gap between reality and acceptance. She respected it. She hated it. Both things sat in her chest at the same time, and she let them. The Kreth formation shifted on the display. She watched their ships, heavy, angular, built like weapons rather than vessels, slide into a new configuration. She recognized the shape. Every Korathi officer recognized it. Encirclement geometry. They weren't rushing. The Kreth never rushed. They were solving the problem the way engineers solved problems, methodically, without emotion, tightening the available space until the solution became inevitable. 41 ships. Against that, Vela-3 pulled up the hull report for Bay 3 and read it twice, though she had already memorized it. Then she read it a third time. The numbers were steady and known, and they stayed where she put them, which was more than she could say for most things at the moment. Ren spoke again, quieter this time. He thought he was being quiet. Response window from the human relay was 7 hours ago. Standard acknowledgement protocol says. I know what it says, she told him. He stopped. She had not meant it to come out hard. She cataloged that too, filed it. Bay 3, officer response, unintentional sharpness, low priority. The human channels had gone quiet. That was the fact of it, clean and without decoration. The distress beacon had gone out across every available frequency. The humans had a relay station 14 light minutes from this system. The physics of it meant that if they had responded immediately, the response would have arrived 6 hours and 40 minutes ago. If they had needed an hour to deliberate, 5 hours and 40 minutes ago. If they had needed 3 hours, 3 hours and 40 minutes ago. The response window had closed. The stars outside did not care about response windows. Velathri had grown up on a planet where the night sky was thick with stars, so many that the dark between them seemed almost accidental, like whoever had made the universe had been generous to the point of carelessness. She had loved it as a child, the density of it, the sense that there was so much out there that surely some of it was paying attention. She was less certain now. The Kreth tightened their formation by another degree. Dreskon's stylus moved on his terminal. Ren logged another impact report from the outer defensive ships. The Corey's breath shuddered once, a distant hit on the ship behind them. The shockwave carried through physics rather than wood, but feeling somehow like a flinch. An hour passed. Then Ren said, and this time he wasn't trying to be quiet, he was just tired. I heard from comms that the human relay was actually flagged 3 cycles ago, before the main engagement, before we even sent the beacon. Velathri kept her eyes on her terminal. Someone made contact through back channels. He paused. No recorded response. 3 cycles ago. The Kreth had begun their encirclement 2 cycles ago, which meant the humans had known before the shape of this became clear. They had known when there was still time for the math to work, for an intercept course to be plotted at manageable speed, for a response fleet to cross the distance without burning their engines to their last edge. They had known. And the response was silence. She pulled up the hull integrity report for Base 7, the one she had already read twice, and began reading it again. Minor breach sealed, pressure stable. She read every number on the page. She read the units of measurement. She read the timestamp. Dreskon stood from his station, slowly, the way old men stand when they have made a decision, and the weight of it is already settling into their bones. Begin preliminary fold positioning, he said. All ships, we do this with order. The bridge acknowledged in their quiet, professional way. Outside the viewport, she did not look, but she knew it was there. The encirclement geometry continued its slow and patient tightening. The old man's storm bands churned. The stars held their positions with complete indifference. Velathri filed her report, started the next one, wrote the numbers down. The numbers were easier than what was outside. The numbers stayed where you put them. The fold had a sound. It was not a dramatic sound, no alarms, no shouting, no crashing of gears. It was the sound of 41 ships adjusting their engine output in careful coordination, a low harmonic shift that moved through the hull of every Korathi vessel like a deep breath taken together. Velathri had run fold drills 300 times in her career. The sound lived in her body the way old songs lived, below thought, below memory, just there, familiar as gravity. She set her hands on her station and began the withdrawal sequence. Ren was working beside her, his movements precise, unhurried. The Kreth would let them go. They always let the Korathi go. The Dominion did not waste firepower on retreating enemies. They saved their ammunition for colonies, for supply lines, for the things that could not run. Velathri did not let herself think about the colony on the far moon, the 40,000. She had filed that report too. 3 days ago she had written those numbers down, and the numbers had stayed where she put them, and she had moved on to the next report because that was the job. The job was the ship. The ship was alive. The 40,000 were a separate jurisdiction, a separate command problem, a separate grief for someone higher than her to carry. She told herself this the way you tell yourself something you have already stopped believing. "Sensor contact," said the officer at the detection array. His name was Pell. He was methodical to the point of being soothing. "Edge of system. bearing 47 by -12. The Kreth have no ships at that bearing, Ren said. I know. Dresgon turned. Classification. Pell was quiet for a moment that was 3 seconds long and felt like longer. Mass signature is wrong, too heavy for a scout, too fast for a carrier. Another pause. Decelerating. The deceleration rate is, he stopped. Report, Dresgon said. Sir, if I report this number, you will think the sensor array is damaged. Dresgon looked at him for a long moment. Report. Pell reported the number. Nobody on the bridge said anything. Run a diagnostic on the array, Dresgon said, and turn back to the fold positioning. Velathri kept her eyes on the edge of the display where the contact sat, a small bright point at bearing 47, moving wrong, decelerating at a rate that the physics of known engine technology did not explain. It was too heavy. It was moving too fast for something that heavy. It was slowing down too hard. Wrong mass, wrong vector, wrong everything. She turned back to her station, began the next withdrawal sequence step. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Dawes, known as Brick to everyone aboard the UNSS Unconditional including, on one occasion, Admiral Osai herself, which she immediately pretended had not happened, was eating reconstituted eggs. He was eating them the way a man eats something he knows is terrible but has decided to treat as a gift anyway. Slowly, with deliberate attention. The mess hall was half empty, the night rotation still at stations, the ship's recycled air carrying the faint smell of the 11-hour burn they had just completed. Burnt insulation, overworked coolant, the specific exhausted smell of a ship that had been asked to do something it wasn't quite designed to do and had done it anyway. Brick had been on the Unconditional for 6 years. He knew her smells. He was reaching for the coffee when Commander Yara Osai walked in. She moved the way she always moved when there was something significant about to happen, exactly the same as when there was nothing significant happening. This was, Brick had decided long ago, either a remarkable act of psychological discipline or proof that she was not entirely human. He had never settled the question to his satisfaction. She looked at the tactical display mounted above the mess hall entrance. It was a secondary display, smaller than the bridge screens, meant for keeping crew passingly informed rather than operationally sharp. She read it for about 4 seconds. Run the numbers again, she said, to no one and everyone. Brick ate his eggs. She pulled the chair across from him and sat down. Did not get food. Folded her hands on the table and looked at the same display from a seated angle, as though the new perspective might change the arithmetic. I ran them, Brick said. And they're bad. How bad? He set down his fork. He picked it back up. He set it down again. We're going into an active engagement envelope in. He checked the time display on the wall, about 3 minutes and 40 seconds, against a Kreth formation that has had several hours to set up firing solutions. Our decel burn has our heat signature lit up like we're trying to get attention, which we are. The unconditional asterisk is one ship. He paused. The numbers are bad. Osai nodded. The colony, he said. Yeah. 40,000. Yeah. He laughed. It was not a funny laugh. It was the kind of laugh that lived right next to something else, not quite grief, not quite fear, the specific feeling of a man who has been in enough bad situations to know that laughing was just what his body did when the alternative was worse. He picked up his coffee. The table was vibrating faintly. At their current speed, everything vibrated. He had not been able to get his meal tray to sit level for the last 4 hours. He kept adjusting it, finding the angle where it rested steady, and then the ship's shutter would move it again. He adjusted it now. It sat. Then the deck hummed and it tilted a fraction. He adjusted it again. You slept, Osai asked. Define slept. She almost smiled, almost, the crew. Ready? He said it simply because it was simply true. He had walked the ship 2 hours ago, the full circuit, every deck, every station. The faces he had seen were tired in the particular way that people get tired when they have made a decision and are living on the far side of it. Not scared. Tired. There was a difference, and Brick knew it well enough to read it in a room. They had all run the numbers. They were all here anyway. Osai stood. "Ma'am," he said. She stopped. "The eggs are terrible," he said. "You should have some." She looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up his fork, took one bite of his eggs, set the fork back down with the expression of a woman confirming a long-held hypothesis, and walked out toward the bridge. Brick looked at the tactical display. The Korathi fleet was mid-fold, withdrawing in the slow, practiced formation that looked, from this angle, like something giving up with dignity. The Kreth formation had closed to execution range. He adjusted his meal tray one more time. 3 minutes. The tray sat still. Then the ship accelerated, final burn, full commitment, the unconditional pressing herself past her own engineering tolerances with the particular stubbornness of a vessel that had been named by someone who meant it. And the tray tilted again, and everything on the table slid left, and Brick reached out and caught his coffee before it went over the edge. He held it steady. Watched the display. 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Dreskon's surrender draft was on page 2 of 3. He was writing slowly, the way men write when they are being precise about something painful. The Kreth required formal language in their protocols, not out of honor, Dreskon had once said, but out of habit. They had received so many surrenders they had developed a preferred format. He was following it exactly. Velathri was not watching him. She knew what he was doing from the sound of his stylus, from the set of his shoulders, from the particular stillness that had settled over the bridge the way stillness settles when the last argument has been made and lost. Around her, the bridge crew worked their stations. Professional. Quiet. The Kreth formation had closed to what her display called * critical execution range, which was the technical term for the distance inside which a surrounded fleet could not maneuver out of a coordinated firing solution. She had learned that term in her second year at the academy. She had hoped, the way young officers hope for things they know are unlikely, to never see it applied to her own ships. Here it was applied. "Fold positioning complete," said the navigation officer. "All ships ready to withdraw on your order, Admiral." Dreskon did not look up from his terminal. "Hold position, 2 minutes." 2 minutes for the language to be right. Velathri understood. 41 ships, however many thousand crew across those ships. Their deaths, if it came to that, deserved correct language. She pulled up the damage manifest for the * Corey's breath, and found the page for base 7 and read it again. Pressure stable, seal holding. She read the timestamp. She read the unit notation. Then Pell said, "The contact at bearing 47 has changed profile." Nobody moved. "It's accelerated," he said. No, it hasn't decelerated further." He stopped. "It's come out of deceleration burn entirely." "Speed?" Dreskon asked. Pell said the number. This time people moved. Not dramatically, they were professionals, but heads turned, and someone made a sound that was not quite a word. Velathri looked at the edge of the display where the contact point had been sitting for the last several minutes, quiet and anomalous and dismissed, and watched it resolve into something real. It was not slowing down anymore. It was not a scout, not a courier, not any ship classification that belonged to the known taxonomy of vessels that traveled this part of space. The mass signature was enormous, the mass of something built for war at the scale of committed intent, and it was moving toward the Kreth formation at a speed that Velathri's mind refused, briefly, to process. Not because she couldn't do the arithmetic. Because the arithmetic said that the thing had been burning for hours to get here, at a rate that would have destroyed most ships, had done so without being asked to stop, and was now arriving already inside the engagement zone before it had finished arriving. It was still moving when it started firing. The first shot from the UNSS Unconditional hit the flank of the Kreth command ship at an angle that was only possible if you had calculated your firing solution while still at travel speed, while still closing, which meant someone had done the math for a moving gun platform against a target that was itself moving, and had done it correctly at a distance, under an 11-hour burn, with one ship against a formation built for total encirclement. The Kreth formation did not break, but it flinched. Velathri had never seen a Kreth formation flinch. The second shot hit a frigate on the formation's far side. The third shot, she was counting now, without deciding to, went into the gap between two Kreth heavy cruisers, close enough to force an emergency dispersal that pulled both ships out of the encirclement geometry. The tight, patient shape that had been slowly closing around the Korathi fleet like a fist was no longer a fist. It was 40 ships reacting in 40 different directions to a threat that had arrived from the wrong angle, at the wrong time, going the wrong speed, and had not announced itself or asked permission. What Iren started? Human ship, Pell said. His voice was the same measured tone he used for all reports. The information seemed to be passing through him the same way all information passed through him, and he was letting it. Designation Unconditional Asterisk, United Nations Space Ship, Battleship Class. One ship. One. Velathri watched the Kreth try to reform. The Unconditional did not let them. It was moving through the formation like something that had decided the rules of engagement were a suggestion, not ignoring them, exactly, because its shots were precise, its movements had logic, but moving with the specific confidence of a thing that had decided it would deal with the consequences later and was presently occupied. It fired again. A Kreth carrier began venting atmosphere from 3 separate points. Then the Unconditional Asterisk took a hit. A serious one. Velathri's display registered the impact, a direct hit from a Kreth rail cannon, the kind of impact that had folded the Velissa in on herself an hour ago. The Unconditional kept moving. She stared at that for a moment. The ship had taken a hit that by any sensible engineering calculus should have changed what it was doing. It had not changed what it was doing. It was still burning forward, still inside the formation, still firing with the heavy, patient rhythm of something that had come here to complete a job. "Orders, Admiral," the navigation officer asked. Dreskon's stylus had stopped moving. Velathri looked across the bridge. The surrender draft was on his terminal, page 2 of 3, the Kreth formal language written out in careful lines. Dreskon was looking at the main display. She could not see his expression clearly from her station. She did not need to. She knew what the display looked like, the Kreth formation breaking, rerouting, caught between the geometry they had set up for one situation and the reality of a completely different one. And she knew what it looked like to watch certainty become something else. "Hold the fold," Dreskon said. "Quiet, simple. All ships hold position." The navigation officer acknowledged. The fold positioning, which the whole fleet had settled into like a held breath, reversed itself in the careful Korathi way. No scrambling, no drama, every ship easing back into defensive formation with the practiced steadiness of a people who did everything with steadiness. The Asterisk Unconditional fired again. The Kreth formation's left flank collapsed, not destroyed, not all of them, but pulling back, pulling away. The encirclement geometry that had been solved mathematics 20 minutes ago now unsolved, now a different problem. A problem that involved a human battleship that was still moving and still hot from 11 hours of burning, and showed no sign of having any intention except the one it had already demonstrated. Velathri realized she had not filed a report in 14 minutes. She looked at her terminal. The Bay 7 report was still open, pressure stable, seal holding. She closed it. She opened the hull integrity report for the Unconditional instead, available through the standard Coalition Identification Exchange, and looked at the damage it had already taken. She read the numbers. They were not good numbers. The ship had taken serious structural damage and was still in the engagement zone and was still firing and had been burning at this rate for 11 hours before this started. She thought about the silence on the human channels. 6 hours, 7 hours, the response window, the gap between when the math said they should have arrived if they left immediately and when they actually had not arrived. The silence was not no. The silence was someone who read the distress beacon 3 cycles ago, ran the numbers, knew what the numbers said, and spent 11 hours burning through those numbers at a rate that would leave their ship damaged and their crew beyond exhausted, and had not announced it, and had not asked for acknowledgement, and had arrived mid-fold because that was when the arithmetic landed. They knew what they were flying into. The asterisk unconditional fired again. Veleth returned back to her station, opened a new report, began writing. The Kreth right flank was withdrawing now, not a fold, not an organized retreat, just ships making the calculation that the situation had changed, and they were not equipped for what it had changed into. The encirclement geometry was gone. The patience was gone. The Kreth Dominion, which had come here with the specific confidence of something that had done this before, had not done it against this before. She wrote her numbers down. She did not name the thing she felt. She filed the report and started the next one. The Kreth remnants were gone. Not destroyed, gone, which was a different thing. Scattered out into the dark, the broken pieces of a formation that had been solved mathematics until it wasn't. Some would regroup, some would not. That was a tomorrow problem. Osai did her walk. Every commanding officer developed one over a long enough career, a post-engagement circuit of the ship, a physical inventory of what remained. Hers started at the bridge, moved through the command corridor, down to engineering, then up through the crew decks in a slow loop that ended back at her office. It took about 40 minutes when the ship was undamaged. Tonight it took longer. The unconditional had taken 3 significant hits. The first, the rail cannon strike that her damage control crew had been managing in real time during the engagement, had buckled 2 sections of the port hull, knocked out one weapons array entirely, and started a fire in a secondary conduit bank that had been extinguished, but left everything in that section smelling like the end of something. The second hit had taken out the rear sensor cluster. The third had done something complicated to the port engine housing that her chief engineer had described with the kind of language she normally reserved for conversations that happened off the record. The ship was alive. She moved through her sections and noted what she saw. Damaged teams working with the quiet focus of professionals who were past the adrenaline and into the next phase, the phase that was mostly bolts and patience. Crew members who looked up when she passed and then looked back down at what they were doing, which was the right response, which was the response that meant they were fine enough to be working. She counted faces the way she always counted faces. Most of them. She moved through the medical section last, sat with the ones who were awake, said what you said, which was never enough and was also the only thing available, so you said it. She stayed longer than the walk required. When she came back through the main corridor, Drescon was waiting. He was a large being, the Korathi admiral, taller than most of his crew, with the particular posture of someone who had spent a long time in command and had the spine to show for it. He had come aboard through the emergency docking bridge that the 2 ships had connected 4 hours after the engagement ended, when the unconditional S damage teams had stabilized enough to permit the connection. He stood in the corridor with 2 of his officers and looked at Osai the way people looked at things they were still in the process of understanding. "Commander," the translation came through the calm bead in her ear, a fraction behind his mouth. "I requested this meeting because I needed to see you in person." "Admiral," she stopped, waited. "My fleet," he stopped, started again. "We were in fold positioning. The surrender protocol was drafted." He said this without embarrassment as a plain fact. "I need to understand why you came." The Korathi sent a distress beacon. We responded. You did not respond to the beacon, he said. The response window had passed. My officers calculated it. You left before you received our signal. She held his gaze. You were already burning when we sent it. We received earlier contact, she said. 3 cycles ago, through back channels, non-official, not a formal request for military support. He paused. Under any reading of coalition protocols, that contact did not obligate a military response. No, she agreed, it didn't. He was quiet for a long moment. His 2 officers stood with the stillness of beings who understood they were present at something that was not for them to comment on. Why, he said. 1 word. He had the translation bead too, but some things didn't need technology to cross. She heard the shape of what he was asking, not the tactical question, not the political question, but the one underneath both of those, the one that didn't have a protocol and didn't have a form to fill out. She gave him the answer she gave in debrief reports and official reviews. Operational language. Clean, correct, the kind of words that made sense in the record. He nodded, accepted it. His officers accepted it. She walked him back to the docking bridge and shook his hand. The Korathi gesture was different, but they had both learned the other's greeting, and he left with the look of a man who had asked the question he meant to ask and had received the answer that was available, which was not quite the same as the answer he had come for. She went back to her office. Brick was in the corridor outside it. He was leaning against the wall with the ease of a man who had been standing in corridors for enough years that walls felt like furniture. He had a coffee in each hand. He said nothing. He held one out. She took it. She held it for a long time before drinking, standing there in the corridor while the asterisk unconditional creaked around her. The sound of a hull settling after being pushed hard. The sounds of damage teams 2 sections over. The low hum of the engines running at reduced capacity on the good side. The silence from the port side where one array would not run again until they made port. She had not told Drescon the full answer. The full answer was that the earlier contact had included a detail that the official back-channel reports had summarized in 2 lines and then moved past, because command decisions had to move past things or they stopped making decisions. A Korathi colony on the far moon. Non-combatants. The number had been in the brief the way all numbers were in briefs. Quietly, among other numbers, waiting for someone to read it with the part of their attention that didn't stay professional. 40,000. She had read that number at her desk on the unconditional asterisk 11 days ago at 200 ship time, with the tactical display open on her right and the route calculation on her left. She had looked at the route calculation. She had looked at the burn time. She had looked at the condition her ship would be in after an 11-hour burn at that speed, and at the formation she would be arriving into, and at the number of ships she had, which was 1. Then she had looked at the number again. 40,000. She had gone to the bridge and told her navigator to plot the course. She had not convened a command review. She had not filed a preliminary assessment. She had not slept for more than an hour in any stretch since, because the engagement calculations had kept finding new complications that required her attention, and there had been no time to find a gap long enough to be worth closing her eyes. She drank her coffee. Brick drank his. The unconditional creaked and hummed around them. She opened the damage manifest on her datapad and looked at the numbers. She had read these numbers. She knew these numbers. She paged to the hull impact assessment for the port side and read it again, the same numbers in the same order, and then she closed it. She opened it again. The colony, Brick said. Evacuation fleet arrived 40 minutes before the Kreth ground forces, per the last relay. He exhaled. Not relief exactly, more like a man setting down something he had been carrying in his shoulders for 11 hours, and was now allowing himself to notice the weight of. Tight, he said. Yeah. He finished his coffee. The eggs were bad, by the way, in case you were still wondering. I wasn't wondering. I know, I'm just logging it officially. He pushed off from the wall. The chief needs you in engineering when you have a minute. She has opinions about the port housing. Tell her I'll be there in 10. He nodded, walked down the corridor. She stood alone for a moment. The manifest was still on her datapad. She closed it and put the pad in her pocket and drank the last of her coffee, which was also bad. The ship's water recycler always produced coffee that tasted like the ghost of coffee rather than coffee itself, and started down toward engineering. The unconditional was alive. She held that. She walked. The unconditional stayed 2 days. Not long enough to be repaired. The damage she had taken required a port facility and weeks of work and parts that weren't available out here among the gas giants in the dark. But long enough for the emergency exchange, for the Korathi engineering teams to come aboard and help stabilize what could be stabilized, and for the unconditional *S teams to go aboard the damaged Korathi vessels and do the same. Both sides worked with the careful, curious attention of people encountering someone else's ship for the first time, and finding it full of choices that made a different kind of sense than their own choices. Velathri heard about the initial exchanges through the reports. The Korathi engineers were fascinated by the unconditional *S engine housing, specifically by the fact that it was still attached to the ship. The burn the human vessel had done to reach them, 11 hours at that speed, had pushed the engineering tolerances past what any Korathi ship of equivalent mass would have survived. The humans had designed for this possibility, apparently. Not for this specific engagement, but for the general category of situation in which you needed to get somewhere fast, and the distance was uncooperative. She read that report twice. She read it a third time. Then she went to the joint work bay on Deck 4, where the 2 engineering teams were sharing a workspace, and the language barrier was being managed through hand signals, basic coalition numerals, and apparently, according to the junior officer who had filed the report, a significant amount of pointing and laughing. She stood at the bay entrance and watched for a moment. A human engineer, young, with the sleeves of his uniform pushed up to the elbows, carrying a diagnostic tool in each hand, was demonstrating something to 2 Korathi engineers, who were watching with the particular attention of beings encountering a new approach to a familiar problem. He set both tools down, picked up a stylus, drew something on the nearest flat surface, tapped it twice. The Korathi engineers looked at each other. Then one of them nodded slowly, with the expression that Velathri recognized, the expression that meant that is wrong in the way that is also somehow correct. She left before any of them saw her. She found the human called Brick Dawes by accident. She had been looking for the docking bay supervisor to sign off on a parts transfer, and the bay supervisor was not where he was supposed to be, and she had turned a corner and found a large human carrying something heavy down a corridor that had a posted weight limit which the human either had not read or had decided was a personal challenge. He was whistling. Not quietly, not absently, with genuine commitment, a tuneless, meandering sound that had no apparent goal except to fill the air around him. He had the particular look of a man who was physically tired in the bones, in the face, in the shoulders, and was ignoring it through sheer procedural stubbornness. "Excuse me," she said, through her own translation bead. He stopped, looked at her, set the heavy thing down with the ease of a person who had been not setting it down for a while and had now found the right moment. "Hey," he said. The translation flattened the tone, but even through the bead she caught something friendly in it. Not formal, just easy. She had the question ready. She had been forming it for 2 days, finding the right shape for it in her own language first, and then working out how to translate it without losing what she meant. The precision mattered. She didn't want to ask something that sounded different from what she intended. She asked, "Do humans experience fear before this kind of engagement?" He considered the question the way she had watched him consider things with the whole of himself, not just the part that produced quick answers. His head tilted. He looked at the middle distance for a moment. He said something that came through the bead as, "Yeah, sure we do." She asked the follow-up, "Then why come?" He picked up the heavy thing again, adjusted the grip. She could see he was thinking, not performing thinking, actually doing it, the way the question deserved. He said, "Because we ran the numbers and the numbers were bad, but we ran the other numbers too." She waited. He nodded down the corridor, toward the direction of the ship they were both guests on in different ways, and said, 40,000 is also a number." He started walking again. She stood in the corridor and listened to him whistling until the sound moved around a corner and was gone. The unconditional undocked 18 hours later. Velathri was at her station on the bridge of the * Corey's Breath when the docking bridge retracted, and the human ship moved away from them, slowly at first, careful with her damaged port side, then picking up speed in the gradual way of a vessel that had somewhere to be, and was managing the distance between her present condition and her capabilities with honest arithmetic. Drescon stood at the bridge's forward viewport and watched the * unconditional until she was too small to see clearly. He did not say anything. He had deleted the surrender draft the morning after the engagement. Velathri had been at her station when he did it. He had not announced it, had simply closed the file and moved to the next thing on his terminal, and she had seen it from across the bridge and they had not discussed it. They both knew she had seen. It sat between them, that knowledge, not as something uncomfortable but as something that had happened and did not need to be handled further. After the unconditional * was gone from the viewport, he went back to his chair. The bridge resumed. The after-action report took 3 hours to write. It was longer than after-action reports usually ran, because the engagement had involved a non-standard element, which was the polite military language for * something that did not fit the existing categories. She wrote up the Kreth formation, the defensive positioning, the fold sequence, the engagement outcome. She wrote up the * unconditional *s arrival, her tactical approach, her weapons deployment pattern, the damage she sustained, and her continued operation through that damage. She wrote all of it in the standard format, in the standard language, with the standard section headers. Then she reached the field at the bottom of the tactical assessment, the classification field. Every engagement in Korathi military records was classified by type, cross-referenced to the existing doctrine library. There was a classification for defensive engagement, for withdrawal engagement, for ally-assisted engagement, for several dozen other categories that covered the range of things that happened in battle. She looked at the field. She thought about what she had watched over the last 2 days. The unconditional arriving mid-deceleration, still moving, already firing. The human ship absorbing a rail cannon strike and continuing. The 11 hours it had burned, not in response to their signal, not with their knowledge, but because someone had read a number and made a decision, and had not told anyone they were coming because the coming was the whole thing. The announcement would have spent time they did not have. She thought about Brick Dawes whistling down a corridor under a load that was too heavy, tired all the way down to the bone. She thought about the question she had asked him, and the answer that had come back through the translation bead, flat and matter-of-fact, the way true things were sometimes delivered. 40,000 is also a number. She looked at the classification field. There was no Korathi word for what she had witnessed, not in the military doctrine library, not in the tactical vocabulary, not in the prayer texts from the academy, not anywhere in the 2,000 years of literature and history and recorded battle that she had read and studied and been formed by. The Korathi had words for endurance, for survival, for the valor of the retreat, for the wisdom of the fold *. They had words for many kinds of courage. They had no word for the kind that ran the numbers, saw that the numbers were bad and came anyway. She left the classification field blank. Then she opened the field's text entry option. For non-standard engagements, the field accepted a manual notation. She sat with the cursor for a moment. She typed in her own language the nearest equivalent she could find. It was an old word. She had not used it in a professional document before. It was a word from the oldest part of the prayer texts, not a military word, not a doctrine word. A word that meant, in the most direct translation she could manage, the kind of thing that arrives when you have stopped asking. She read it back once. She filed the report. Outside, the old man's storm bands churned on in their slow, ancient way, and the stars held their positions, and the Corey's breath moved through the dark with her damaged hull and her living crew, and somewhere in the direction of the deep coalition systems, the UNSS Unconditional was burning for home.